Hey guys, Clover and welcome back to another theory. Today I'm going to go back to Undertale for a bit, also a little bit of Deltarune at the end, and because I want to talk about one of my favourite things from Toby Fox's work, which is his use of realistic events or realism within his games. But before we get into that, please consider subscribing. I'm at 770 and I'm trying to get to 1,000 by the end of September. And any little helps. Without further ado, on with the video. Okay, first of all, what do I mean by realism within Undertale and Deltarune games? I actually have two different ways to go around this. Number one is realism in the ways characters act and react to elements that usually we ignore in video games, or how they on the surface seem like just your goofy cartoony characters, but then once you dig deeper you actually get to like very realistic characterizations of different types of people and groups of people, and like how good that representation is. And the second example of realism in these games is realism as in the graphics or like actual real people. I won't go too much into depth with this, but it's like in Undertale, obviously, and Deltarune, it's all pixel art, so the idea of seeing something that looks like a real human would throw you off, when most of the time humans in these games look like very simple caricatures of what humans actually look like. I think first I'm going to go over the use of realism in writing in Undertale, then realism of like real people in Undertale. They'll do the same for Deltarune. To start this analysis video, I want to look at Undertale's writing, and more specific, the writing of two of the routes. And not just any routes, I want to look at all two of the pacifist routes that aren't the true pacifist route. This may sound confusing to a lot of people, as I think the way I split up Undertale's endings is slightly different than some people might, but in my opinion, there is three different routes for the pacifist route of the game. First of all, you have true pacifist. This route is the one most people talk about that ends in the fight with Azure Dreamer, and the one where you befriend everyone. I don't want to focus on this route too much, as I think everyone's talked about that route to death. Instead, I want to look at a bit before that. Usually when you play Undertale, what you will do is you'll go through the game, you'll spare everyone if you're doing the pacifist route, and then you'll go on the extra bits of content like the Papyrus or Undying Date. Then after that, you'll go up to Asgore, fight Asgore, do the Omega Flowery fight, and then that's the neutral ending. And then afterwards, you'll go back and do the Alphys ending, or the Alphys State route and the True Lab. And that's the way most people, to my knowledge, see this game and see the way you're meant to do the route. But something important about this, I don't think a lot of people realise, is the fact that that isn't the necessary way of going around to get the true pacifist ending. And there's actually a second route you can take to do the same thing. If you've ever played the pacifist route of the game, you may have found it weird, like I did, that once you got told by Flower to go back and be better friends for everyone, you instantly get called by Undying the moment you step into the core area of the game, because it feels very abrupt and it feels like you were told to do a bunch of stuff, and then you instantly get guided towards one specific thing. The reason this is because you don't have to do any of the extra date stuff in the pacifist neutral ending, and instead you can say that all until after you fight Omega Flowery, which is why Flowery says there are some people, plural, that you should have been better friends with. It's only if you've already become friends with Papyrus and Undyne fully that he will specify Alphys. Other than that, you will pretty much be able to go back and do everything. And while neither one's the intended way to do it, there is obviously some level that it expects that people for the first time might miss either the papyrus date or undying date and end up having to do that after the fact. Now, while these two routes do both end in the same ending, I do want to classify them as two different routes because of the importance they hold to the topic I want to talk about here, which is how Toby Fox takes characters who are very unrealistic and very like almost like caricatures of like tropes and adds realism to them by allowing you to interact with them in a more in-depth level, and how these two routes will show the differences between a route where you don't actually see them as people and you just play the game for the overall story, and the one where you slow down and analyze everyone, and how the second one is so much better because of how Toby points at you to do it if you haven't done it, because it will then make the true passive ending mean more to you. Now then, let's break down what happens in what I like to call the pacifist neutral and route of the game. This is not the good one, this is not the true one. This is just the one where you spare everyone but don't do any of the dates. All of the characters you meet are very simple in this ending. They're not like one-dimensional or two-dimensional, but they don't have all of their dimensions to them that you might see in other endings. First of all, you have characters like Toriel, who will only ever show up once. She is pretty much just shown as being a very caring mother who has no real flaws. There are hints at flaws towards the end where she tells you to never come back, but other than that, you can't really get much from her. Sans is very much so a character who in this ending seems like they are just a character who doesn't really care about anyone, a bit of a comedian, but does have some amount of care for his brother. Then Papyrus, he just is shown as a very, like, slightly arrogant, little bit of a dumb character who means well and wants to be loved and respected. Then you have Undyne, who is a very over-the-top warrior, who wants to be seen as stoic, but also is quite goofy. Then you have Alphys, who is like a slightly antisocial nerd, who struggles with interactions a lot. Metaton, who is a very flamboyant like celebrity, who seems to only really care about themselves, although in this ending you do see some care for other people, although it's not inherently obvious. As a side note, I know technically learning more about Metaton is through the diaries, but I'm saying because of the fact that in this route you would have not gone to do any of the extra date stuff, I don't think you would have either gone and found Metaton's old room. And then finally you have Asgore, who I think in this route you get the most of, due to the whole monologue or conversation you have with all the monsters, and then the conversation you have with Asgore. And finally, of course, you have Flowey, who in this ending seems to be a very uncaring character, and just seems to be just a psychopath. All of these are not bad characters by any means, but they're not memorable. If these were what the Undertale characters were through and through, then nobody would remember Undertale for being as good as a game as it is. Because so many RPGs, or not even RPGs, so many pieces of media that have come before Undertale and after have done these exact same character tropes and have these exact same two-dimensional characters. And it's why I think it's so important that Toby specifically says to you, if you do a passive ending, but don't interact with the characters deeper, he literally says to you through Flowey, you must go back and talk to these characters on the level as if they're equal to you, as if they're humans and not just ones and zeros, and he makes you interact with the game, and then doing it through Flowey of all characters, a character who in the neutral runs of the game is only seen as a psychopath who cares about himself, having him be the one to tell you you need to go back and interact with these characters. It means a lot because it's the first sign we get that Flowey actually has something deeper going on other than the stick he throws up of being this like two-dimensional psychopath who doesn't actually have anything else going on. Honestly, I'm only going to say this because I just watched it. Flowey and Jax have very similar characters, although the context to them are very different. Actually no, the context of them are very similar, where they are both characters who see the world for being a game and nothing really mattering, and losing all sense of their humanity. And I think it's very interesting the fact they both end up interacting in the same way, where they act like they don't have any form of care, although the moment you actually try to get any deeper with them, they do start to show signs that they have tried to care, and they've stopped caring for whatever reason. And the fact that it is specifically in the ending, where right before you go and to go to the true, like the actual dreamer fight, that Flowey reveals himself as someone who does somewhat care, is the first sign that some of these characters actually have more depth and more realism to them. Which will then, in this route, lead perfectly into the route where you actually go back and look into depth at these characters, which is when the realism finally reveals itself in these characters. Okay, now that I've talked about like the worst neutral pacifist route, I want to talk about why the existence of that one really helps to like push forward the true neutral pacifist route, where you actually go and make friends with everyone as much as you can. Because obviously, as I said before, all of the character tropes you see in the other route seem very two-dimensional, and while are fun and are very memorable on the first viewings, it won't last that long if that's all they are, and you won't be able to look back as fondly if all they are these two-dimensional characters. And also, the true pacifist ending relies on you having a deep connection with every character, so the idea that these two-dimensional characters are meant to make you feel that wouldn't even work, which is why Toby knew that and made it so once you go back and you go to these characters who have been most of the time two-dimensional throughout your experiences, and allows you to talk to them outside of their specific storylines in the game, it then allows them to step away from the tropes they encompass and actually expand more of their characters, and making them a more real character in the process. A good example for this is Papyrus and Sans. Papyrus and Sans are both a very simple trope of a character who knows more than they let on, but protects the other character innocence because that's all they really care about anymore, and a character who is very innocent and doesn't really understand what's going on, but cares about the other character still. This is obviously Sans and Papyrus to a T, but not really. That's what a lot of people see them as on a fast playthrough. But if you go on a date with Papyrus, you'll get to see another side of Papyrus, where it's obvious they are kind of going along with things, even if they don't actually themselves want to. Papyrus says they didn't have feelings for us, but they thought they had to go on a date with us to make us happy, but then realised in the process that they weren't making themselves happy, and they were just in fact leading us on, which would make us hurt more in the process. And it shows us Papyrus from a new perspective, where he does actually understand what's going on. It just sometimes takes him a bit longer to get there, and he just is a little bit more inexperienced. But that doesn't mean he's dumber or he's worse than any other character. It just makes him feel more real than he would otherwise. But to make this obvious, like, less 2D character trope even more obvious, in one of the neutral endings where you kill, like, I think everyone but Papyrus, Papyrus will ask Sans where all of their friends have gone, where Sans will respond but going, oh, they're on vacation, and I'll tell you when you get a card from them. Papyrus, the way he speaks in the scene it's very obvious that Papyrus knows that Sans is lying, and knows that Sans is trying to protect his innocence. But Papyrus also knows the fact that after all of their friends have died, all that Sans really has left is Papyrus, and Sans wants Papyrus to still be happy, as that's all he has left to care about, and Papyrus doesn't want to hurt his brother anymore, so he goes along with these lies. And that's what these characters actually are. It's not the basic trope of one character who protects the other character. It's two characters who protect each other because they care about each other, and they're the only two who they have left. And that makes even more sense if you buy into the Sans is from Deltarune Theory, because literally Papyrus and Sans are the only two from the Deltarune universe. So of course, Sans views Papyrus as the highest importance, as Papyrus is the last person from that life he has left. So it makes sense that they both would care about each other so much. Going along with this trend, you then have obviously Undyne and Alphys, who at first, as I mentioned, both come up as 2D, one as a nerd who is self-conscious, and the other as a warrior who's a bit over the top and very energetic. But once again, when you go and look at them, you find out that Alphys isn't just antisocial because they're like a nerd. They're antisocial because they have a very traumatic past, and they don't and can't forgive themselves for the things they're responsible for, and they lock everyone else out in order to protect them from being hurt by them. Whereas Undyne is very bombastic in their role, but the moment they step out of that role, you realise they are just a truly caring character who has a very personal relationship with characters like Asgore and Alphys, and who don't actually hate you. They've just been taught to hate you, and the moment you two get to know each other more, you actually get to see behind the masks these characters have been wearing in their story, which then adds to the realism of them, but then it adds even more depth, because when you get to the Asriel fight, obviously each character has been captured by Asriel, and when they're captured, they just keep on saying these same things, like Sans who being really depressed and not caring anymore, Papyrus being really fixated on the Royal Guard to the point where he would ignore the fact he's hurting people, Undyne just being a warrior, Alphys hating herself. But because of the fact that in this route you've gone out of your way to become good friends with each character, and actually take the time to look past the tropes these characters reside in and see who they actually are and what they actually see themselves as, which then allows you to break them free from the tropes, metaphorically and literally in a scene, which means you're quite literally taking these characters out and giving them realism in order to fight for their own freedom. And the idea that Toby uses realism to as a break from the narrative, and as to break free from the narrative and control of whoever's in charge is really interesting and really powerful message. But now that I've gone over quite a lot of how Toby uses realism as a writing device, I want to talk about how he uses it as a narrative device in a visual sense of the term. Now, while I do think Toby's use of realism as in a writing device is very important and can show a lot of the ways he sees the characters, that isn't the only way he uses realism. In the Omega Fairy fight, it is the first time we ever see a character absorb souls, which is something we've heard about multiple times throughout the story. And we are told that when a monster absorbs a soul, even just one, they become like a god. So, and it's literally described that seeing a monster with one soul is undescribable and makes either Frisk or the narrator feel uncomfortable when seeing it. Now, what way can you make a game with pixel art as the main art style, have a character who is supposed to represent this god-like figure who is above the reality of their own, especially in a character like Flowey, who sees their own universe as just a game like we do. So how can a character like that, or how would a character like that become godly? And what would that look like? Well, obviously, if he views everything like a game, when he becomes all-powerful, the most logical thing for him to do is to break free from looking like the things in that game and become real. Which is why it's so fascinating that the character that's supposed to be like this almost eldritch horror god is represented through real-life images, and the first boss battle to have full colour in the sprite, because it's literally Flowey breaking away from the rules and of the game to go to a higher life form, and that higher life form is us as the player, our universe. So Toby Fox literally uses realistic imagery in order to create a character who seems more powerful than the unrealistic imagery around them. Now, this is amazing, and really like a smart way of having a character be really shown just visibly to be powerful, without just going to the regular route of like adding a bunch of effects, or just like having them be really big, even though obviously they are quite big. But that's not the only way. It also adds an unnatural element, obviously, which makes you feel just as uncomfortable as the characters in universe seeing it, which is done through the use of context that only we would have. Like the fact that like parts of it are fleshy, other parts are like plant-based. Some parts are a mix between like organic and metal. Obviously, to a character in the universe, they don't know what any of the things they are looking at actually are. They don't know what a real fleshy thing looks like, or a real metal organic thing looks like. They know what their things look like, and they probably wouldn't be able to in their universe translate it from what it looks like in their universe to our universe. So obviously they're seeing something like an eldritch horror, but they don't understand it, so it doesn't affect them as much. It might make them uncomfortable to see, but it won't affect them. But then to us as the player, we understand what we're looking at. We can understand these horrors that are supposed to be beyond the comprehension of any character in the game, but we also are thrown off by it still, and it's almost like we can understand it at first, but then the more we look at it, the less we understand. Like, for example, the metal pipes. You first look at them and go, oh, there's metal pipes. But then you keep on looking and they feel like intestines, and it feels like something that can't happen. And obviously you have the cartoon face that sometimes is replaced by a realistic or a real person like screaming in pain. Obviously someone in the universe just would see that as noise. They wouldn't understand what's going on. But to us, we understand that it almost like feels like there's a real human in there in the pain. And there's no way to fully understand what's going on in the fight, which makes it perfect for a character who's supposed to be an unknowable god. And it works well in the context universe, because it would be unknowable because it's not from their universe. But it's also unknowable in our universe, because it takes elements from the game, our universe, and mix them in the most unnatural way possible. And I think Toby's use of realistic, or just realism, and realistic depictions of things in order to like break down what makes a game and what makes something real, and really immerse us into what's going on in the game. And also just the way he always uses realistic imagery to represent things that have a higher power within the universes of Undertale and Deltarune. I think it's just very interesting. Now time to get into why the way we see Toby Fox use these ideas and concepts in Undertale is actually very important to the way things happen in Deltarune. First of all, I think Toby Fox is doing something very similar to what he did within Undertale's universe, but just having it to a way where it has to happen, and it's not just a thing where you can ignore it. What I mean by this is I think Toby Fox is now introducing characters as these kind of 2D characters who do have depth, sure, but are like pretty two-dimensional, don't have too much going on, and then throwing them into situations that forces them to reconcile with who they are as a person and reconsider stuff. Like, for example, Susie in Chapter 1 is just your typical bully to friend trope. It's not a bad trope by any means, it's very memorable and it's very likeable. But there's a reason why people only really started to like love Susie as much as they do after Chapter 3 and 4. And that's because during Chapter 1 and 2, it was very much so a thing of Chapter 1, Susie was a mean girl who just slowly but surely learned to accept the fact that we were now friends and become friends with us, or friends with Chris even. And then Chapter 2 was just Susie still being a bit mean every now and then, and being a little bit like, I don't really care still, but also still being very friendly. It's a nice, like, it's a very common trope, it's a nice trope. It didn't really affect too much, and it was just a nice storyline for the game. But then, Chapter 3 and 4, like, show how Susie kind of wants to be this nice person that they are now, and is almost scared of going back. What I mean by this is, Susie sees the fact that she's been able to make friends with all these darkness, and become close to all these darkness, and how Rousey was one of the people to help her realise that she can actually stop putting on this act of being a bully, and actually become friends with people. But then in Chapter 3, she's instantly hit with the realisation of darkness aren't necessarily real, and they are actually just objects who like don't really have personalities. Is what she's told. I don't think that's true, but she's told this. And I think that you can really tell the idea that all the stuff that's helped her grow, all the stuff that's helped her become more reassured in who she actually is as a person, the idea that none of it was actually real, and the idea that all of it just means nothing, hurts her, and she doesn't want it to be true, and she refuses to believe in it. Which is then when Susie goes from just a character who started out as mean and went to nice through the help of others, to a character who now almost feels necessary, or feels like it's necessary to help the people around them to not feel like an object, because if they do, it will make them less real in their eyes, which will make them less real in her eyes, almost, if that makes sense. We see that with Tenor, where usually, like with Queen, Susie just does not really care much to like go along with like her gags and her like tricks, but she still has fun once they happen. But with Tenor, she realizes that Tenor is almost in a similar position to her, where nobody really cared about her, and the only people who cared about her are now like, or cared about him even, are now basically going like, oh, we don't really matter or care to you anymore. And it's like, Susie 100% has put herself in Tenor's shoes within Chapter 3. And it ends with Susie giving this amazing speech to Tenor about how even though he's like a darkener, doesn't mean he's not real or doesn't matter to people. And the fact that he even helped one person in any way means that he mattered. And while obviously this is directed at Tenor, I think this is Susie trying to make Rousey realise that even though Rousey's a darkener who isn't real in the light world, Rousey has directly helped and impacted Susie in a way no one else has been able to before. And because of the fact that Rousey was able to do that one thing, it will mean he has completely changed the trajectory of Susie's life, meaning that he does matter to the light world in a meaningful way, even if it's not direct in any way. And this idea of taking a character who is just a very simple character arc and then having them arc a second time is, number one, a good use of realism, because in real life, people don't just get better and then that's it and they stop growing forever. People get better in chunks. They go from like, oh, I'm not doing too good, to doing better, to doing better. And no one ever really gets to the top. No one ever gets to their best. There's always room to grow, or mistakes you could make that allow you to keep growing. And that's what Deltarune is really showing us, where Susie starts as just simple trope of this character arc we've all seen before, but then she arcs again and again as she learns the truth about the nature of the world she's in. But instead of beating people down or beating herself down for it, she takes it in stride and learns from it. And I think the best example of her being this much more realised person within chapter 4 is the end scene where she gets so angry she punches the prophecy and starts bleeding, and yet she knows that it isn't anyone else's fault, or not even half, it's no one's fault. So while she's angry, she knows that there's no point in taking that out on herself or the people around her. So she puts on a brave act. She knows that Rousey felt like his one goal in this area was to protect her from this, and she didn't want him to feel like he failed her. Which, whether or not that worked directly, is up to interpretation, I guess. But I think that's going to be a good sign of how things are going to go in the future. Rousey, pretty much throughout chapter 2 and kind of 3, kind of learns the fact that you don't have to be the nicest person ever at all times to be a good person, and you're allowed to be mean to people at times. To bring back the digital circus analogy, it is kind of like how Ragatha literally puts it on herself to help everyone around her at all times, to the point where it hurts her and the people around her, only for Kingo to make her realise that she doesn't have to. She is, just because she isn't doing 100% of the time, she doesn't make her a bad friend or a bad person. I think that's the first thing Rousey learned. But Rousey still has places to go. Rousey still doesn't realise how much he matters to people. And Rousey still feels like they are tied down in these feelings of being unimportant, when we can evidently see that's not true through Susie. So I think every character is going to go through their first arc. You have that be Noelle with standing up to Queen, Rousey becoming less used by people, Susie becoming a nicer person. That first arc is just going to be set up for a much deeper and much more impactful second arc. And hell, we still have 3 more chapters to go. There could be a third arc for all the characters that could conjoin it all together. And I think that's just a very smart way of using character arcs in a way that's not very unrealistic or very overused, as it's less of an arc and more of an evolution of the characters. But now that I've talked about the realism in writing, it's time to once again look at the realism in depictions. I think Deltarune hasn't got to the point yet where we're going to have a lot of very realistic things, but there are still a few points I would like to point out. Number 1, Deltarune, this is a weird example for me to use, but the egg in chapter 3 is a very good example of a realistic thing for the setting. Because it's not realistic for the real world, but it's a realistic way for something in the old NES game, like Zelda, to be hidden, as it feels like childhood rumors, L is real, or anything like that, where you go oh, if you do A, B, C, E and then D, it will do something very secret. And having Chapter 3's egg do that shows the fact that it makes it feel like a real secret that you find in the game, like from the past, and it really connects it to the themes of the Dark World, which shows that the Dark Worlds are quite realistic depictions of what they would be in the Light World. Not the Light World even, the real world, like our world. I also think the same could be said about the church, but honestly I don't really want to get into like religious debate in this video, if that's fair enough. But I think that's a very important thing to point out. But moving on to like the imagery that's realistic, we don't have too much, because I feel like Toby likes to keep that sort of stuff towards the end, like with Omega Theory being only at the end of the game. But I have one active depiction and one theory that I think would make sense with the way Toby uses realism. Okay, first of all, they're in the Titan. When they first come up and you see them for the first time, they look so much like a real human head silhouette, and it really threw me and a lot of other people off when we first played, because it looks like this is a real person, but then it's just shown to be a trick of the light. And I think that's setting up directly the fact that at some point we're going to find a Titan or character who's going to have a very realistic human design. And I think that's going to be a terrifying moment for us and the characters. But moving on to the more interesting and the theory aspect, is we have the Angel, who the characters get to see what they look like, but we don't, as it's blocked by a black bar on our screen. This is interesting, because the characters are shocked and confused by what it even is. And it's important to note, they don't do that with any other character, no matter how far out their art style goes. Because they never question why, like, Starwalker is way much, like, lower details than anyone else. They never question why Tenor is like a 3D character. Because while yes, it makes sense, they still, to like be questioning it, they are still like pixel art. It's just that the shapes are weird, which is fine. But I think for them to see something that just the looking at it completely weirds and creeps them out, especially Susie, who usually goes along with this sort of stuff, it has to be something completely out of the world. And I think something similar to Omega Theory could be good, where it uses real elements of like things from, like images and things from our world. And I think something a lot of people have pointed out, but I want to point out here again, is that the fact, because the image is blocked by a black screen on our screen, it makes the screen reflect our own face. So it could be a thing that they are actively looking at our face. And you could just imagine already that a character who's made up with like 32 pixels, but 32 by I think 16 pixels is the ratio for the character sprites, seeing something that, in all honesty, would basically like photorealistic to us, wouldn't make sense to them, because like they are used to having people be made up of like small little square chunks, because that's what their world looks like. That's what everything looks like. They see someone that isn't made that way, who has like a ton of detail on their face, it would just throw them off so much, which would explain why Susie is so weirded out by the way the Angel looks. But obviously, while I do think it would fit in a lot with the way Toby wrote stuff in Undertale, that is still very much so a theory, but I do think it's very likely to happen at this point. But let me know what you think. Other than that, thank you for watching this a little bit more experimental video. I wanted to go a bit more like of an analysis than a theory, but I still hope you guys enjoyed the theory part at the end. I'm sorry that Delta Blight has kind of been put on the back burner. I just have like 4 other projects right now. But don't worry, Delta Blight will probably be next week, as I have a lot of the stuff done. It's just some of the back end stuff done. I would recommend going back and watching episode 1. I will say there might be a website you could find out right now. So if you guys can find that, then I don't know, leave a comment on this video or the Delta Blight video saying you found it. Don't put a link to the website, but maybe give people hints on how to find it. Other than that, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.